Hey, it's Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today we're doing a Should You Back It or Not on Divinus from Lucky Duck Games. And Divinus is going to be Lucky Duck Games' first legacy game. This is a game that is on GameFound, so for the next 14 times that I accidentally say Kickstarter, rest assured, I know it's GameFound, force of habit, and all that. Please forgive me. But Divinus is going to be, well, we'll go through the whole thing. We're going to go through the campaign, the gameplay, all that, the should you back it, timestamps down below, and all of that in case you want to skip to that. Additionally, it's worth noting I already have a review as well as 2 gameplays on this game. And with that, let's go through an overview of what Divinus is if you aren't already aware. Divinus is going to be a tile-laying legacy game. It's going to be 12 missions, effectively, 12 games you're going to be going through, at least in the core box. More in expansions, more in one-shots, will cover all that. And in those 12 missions, you're going to be expanding upon the rules of the game. So the first game is going to be effectively just a tile-laying game. You're going to grab tiles from the central grid that you can see on the screen. You're going to take those tiles, you're going to put them into your own individual 4x4 areas. You're going to have a 4x4 area, you're building it out, putting a tile down. Once a single player has completely filled a 4x4 area, it's going to trigger endgame immediately. But what you're going to be doing is, as you put tiles out, you're also going to be adding stickers to various tiles. You're also going to be accomplishing quests, and that's going to evolve basically your first game. Game 2 is going to have a little more going on. Maybe you unlock a few new actions, maybe things, the stickers you've placed in the first scenario. And stickers is an abstraction. The sticker represents the fact that you had a choice between building a fortress and erecting Stonehenge, and you chose to build a fortress, and now the app remembers the next time you explore that location. The app knows the fortress you've created. The app remembers who placed it, what happened, who owes whom allegiance within this land, and you start exploring and building up this narrative as you go through this as you go through this tile laying game. And then in game 3, I can't tell you anything about Game 3 because I haven't played Game 3. You see, this 12-scenario game, they've only actually released the first 2 scenarios to reviewers, previewers, whoever, who have gotten their hands on the game. So I can tell you that the game evolves significantly in Game 2 from Game 1. I cannot tell you a thing about Games 3, 4, 5, all the way up through 12, plus the 8 in the prequel, plus the one-shots, plus all of that. So Divinus is going to be a game that is a tile-laying legacy game with a focus on narrative that expands to some extent. That's overall what Divinus is going to be bringing. Now, in my review, I compared it to a certain extent to My City. It very much gave me the feeling that My City did, although with much heavier degree of emphasis on the narrative elements than My City ever did. My City is going to be 24 games. You're going to be going through half-an-hour games as you grab different tiles, place them out, polyomino tiles, and then move on to the next scenario with a few small rule adjustments. Divinus seems to have more rules being added in between games, and a much higher degree of focus on the narrative, which is why they use the app, by the way, because I didn't really mention it. I probably should have, but Divinus is very much going to be an app-driven game. If you don't like apps in your games, well, neither do I, and Divinus maintains the legacy that Lucky Duck, legacy was not used intentionally there, Divinus maintains the legacy that Lucky Duck has for me, that their app-driven games don't bother me. I have not necessarily kept all of them, but when I don't keep them, Chronicles of Crime is a good example. I didn't actually keep Chronicles of Crime, but it wasn't because of the app. The app I actually thought was really well done. Destinies is a game that I thoroughly love despite the app, and it is despite the app, but I love it despite the app. And then Divinus, the app is present, but it's not in your way, it's not in your face. You pull it out as you unlock or accomplish a new quest, and then you read the text and you make a choice. You're tracking a few small things, but it's not in the way at all. It is an app-driven game, but not one that bothers me, at least not as far as the app-driven elements go, because those are required to remember the story. That sticker you placed, that fortress you erected, that tribe you conquered, all those things are going to be things that the app remembers for you, so that you don't have to track them through some, well, pencil, paper, all of that. So the app does give you a large degree of possibilities that you wouldn't otherwise have in this game. That's overly what Divinus is. That's a high-level overview of what the game is bringing to the table, which brings us to the various rewards, the pledge levels that we can go through. Because there are a few pledge levels, and we'll talk about the should you back it soon enough. Timestamps, of course, if you want to jump to anything, but we'll go through the rest of what we know so far about this campaign. And to begin with, Divinus is going to have the Chest of Plenty pledge, which is going to be the main pledge that they're pitching on the GameFound page. I almost said Kickstarter there. The Chest of Plenty pledge is giving you basically everything you can get throughout the rest of the pledges. Let's go ahead and click through to that and see what the options are. You'll be getting the Divinus base game. You'll be getting the Chest of Plenty, which seems to replace the base game box. It includes all the contents of everything and the miniatures you'll be getting as well, all in one big box. We have the Shadow of Yggdrasil expansion, we have Pandora's Box expansion, and then the miniatures upgrades that you get in the Chest of Plenty. That's overall what you're getting over there. Scrolling down, we have the Demigod Pledge. Demigod Pledge is going to be their base entry point to this game, giving you the base version of Divinus, and then the stretch goals, which is known as Pandora's Box. It's going to make for a great unboxing video when I eventually get it, by the way, because I mean, I don't know exactly what I'll do, but there's going to be some joke about Pandora's Box. We'll figure out what the joke is either way. But yeah, Demigod Pledge was going to give you Divinus and the Pandora's Box. We're going to have the Godly Pledge for an extra 40 euros. That's an extra 40 euros. That's not a small amount of money to be adding the Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion with another 8 games. And we'll talk about the gameplay aspect and how much gameplay you're going to get in a single game, in a single scenario, all of that in the Should You Back It, Should You Not. There is a Eternal mode you can keep playing, but we'll talk about that as well. That's going to be the pledge levels. So you have the Chest of Plenty Pledge, the Demigod Pledge, and the Godly Pledge, giving you 3 different tiers. The Chest of Plenty is giving you a single big box, as well as giving you miniatures and upgrades to your game that you wouldn't otherwise get in the Demigod or Godly Pledge. You'd be getting meeples instead of miniatures, and to be very clear, those miniatures upgrade from the meeples. It's not in addition to the meeples, so factor that into your decision in case you are someone who wants both or either or whatever it is as far as that goes. As far as stretch goals, before we go through stretch goals, let's talk about the overall structure of the content you'll be getting in these games. The base game of Divinus is going to be giving you 12 games, 12 campaigns. That's what you're going to be getting out of it. And those campaigns are going to range in length. In my 2 playthroughs that I had with Rena, both those games were roughly in the half-an-hour range. But keep in mind, that skips the first 10 minutes or so of reading the narration and going through all the setup and narration and all of that. You may or may not consider that gameplay. That's up to you. But overall, I would say Divinus is going to range. I would argue it's coming in at roughly 15 to 20 minutes per player you have in a game. So a 3-player game of Divinus might be an hour. A 2-player game of Divinus might be 30-40 minutes. And a 4-player game of Divinus might run an hour and 20 minutes, somewhere in that range. So call it roughly an hour per game, possibly a little lower, especially if you're looking at it as a 2-player experience. From there, that means those 12 games potentially are looking at somewhere in the range of 6 to 12 hours. I say 6 to 12 because, well, also depends on player count, so it could be 6 to 12, it could be even more than that, because you may have things unlocking as you go through that increase the complexity of the game. While Game 2 versus Game 1 for us was not much longer at all, it is entirely possible that as you go through it, as you unlock more things, the game length is increased, giving you more hours of gameplay out of this. And I don't usually focus on hours of gameplay in games, but as a legacy game that does not have any sort of sticker pack or replacement pack, if you want to play it again, you basically buy it again. Otherwise, you play through your game and then you go into Eternal mode and that's it, which is why I'm focusing on the hours of gameplay you are getting out of this game. That's going to be the Divinus base game. So somewhere between, again, depending on player count, depending on how complex things get added, you're looking at 6 to 18 hours of gameplay out of those 12 games that you'll play. From there, we have the Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion. The Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion is going to be a prequel campaign, so it takes place before Divinus, which means whatever legacy elements it has will not impact Divinus. It will not be an ongoing story carried out from the arc of your characters. It is a prequel campaign consisting of 8 more missions, so again, apply the same math, so somewhere between 4 to 12 hours of additional gameplay on that, depending on player count, complexity, all of that. And then additionally, we're going to have a bunch of one-shot modes. Those are going to be the things we're going to be adding to Pandora's Box. Many of all the stretch goals we're going to be adding are mostly going to be one-shot modes that both give you content for a single shot adventure, as well as giving you cards and content for the Eternal mode, adding to the replayability of their Eternal mode should you choose to go down that pathway. Additionally, if you get the Chest of Plenty, you'll be getting an additional exclusive myth scenario. Myth scenarios are going to be the term they apply to the one-shot adventures, so you're going to get another one through there. So once again, you're getting 12 games from the base game, you're getting 8 more from the Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion, and then you're getting whatever we unlock in the stretch goals, plus 1 more in the Divinus Chest of Plenty, although again, those are going to be one-shot modes. They are not adding to the legacy element, they're giving you singular scenarios to go through. Which brings us to the various stretch goals are all that we unlocked. Let's go ahead and click through one of these and then check them out. So we have the Gorgon monster miniature, we have new god cards, and these are all going to be typical Lucky Duck scenarios as far as how they unlock stretch goals, unlocking clumps of them together. We're going to have new artifact tokens, including Hephaestus, I can never say that name, sword. Will you cut off the head of a Gorgon? I hope so. I'd love to cut off the head of a Gorgon. And then these are going to be expanding the content for the Eternal mode as well. We're going to have quest cards, we're going to have the god cards, we're going to have, that's where we are. We're currently unlocking the myth of Keto. The myth of keto is that you can actually lose weight on it because it's so hard. But anyways, that's a joke that 14 people got. Anyways, additionally, we have the additional dice set as an add-on. The additional dice set is only really relevant if you're trying to play through any of the myths or through playing through the Eternal mode while you are still unlocking and developing the campaign. So if you're trying to play multiple things simultaneously, that's what the additional dice are useful for. Otherwise, not so much. That's overall going to be the, I guess, what you have in here, what you have as far as that. You can go through the FAQ. FAQ covers a bunch of other questions, but mostly the things I talked about, giving you a breakdown of the content, explaining that there's not going to be a sticker pack or some sort of reset pack, and that's primarily because the amount of content you destroy in the game is enough that they'd have to sell you most of a new game anyway, and that adds the logistics and production, so they're not really taking that route. It's going to be a game that you play through, you have an Eternal mode, it's going to be where you can continue playing forever through your legacy game that you may or may not want to, and we'll touch upon that in the should you back it for this game. Should you back it, should you not? This is a new one for me. I think this is the first legacy game I've covered on Kickstarter/GameFound. I think. I could be wrong. Or at the very least, if it isn't the first one, then it's the first notable big one. Sure, we have games like Frosthaven, but Frosthaven is more of a resettable one with peelable stickers. It doesn't cross as much into full legacy destruction and all of that. This is going to be possibly the first real big legacy game that I've covered in a Should You Back It or Should You Not, which changes the entire conversation, because if you've watched my Should You Back It videos before, you know that it's effectively about, okay, great, you want to buy a game, you want to get the game, you want to back it on Kickstarter, on GameFound, you'll get the game, it's not for you, what do you do next? Well, in the case of Divinus, if you've already started playing it, you're not going to be able to sell it, so that conversation's kind of off the table. Legacy games do not hold their value well at all. You can get a little bit back if you really haven't done much. If you've played the first scenario, you've stickered a few things, and you're like, well, wow, I am done with this game, you can possibly find someone who's willing to pay you like half the price to take a one game scenario played, but even that is still going to be a challenge. Generally, when people choose to invest in a legacy game, when they choose to invest their time, their money, and their energy into it, it's usually because they fully want to go into it. They fully want to dive into and explore that legacy experience. And by the way, if you're getting Divinus and you give up after one play, save yourself the time right now. Do not get Divinus. Divinus is a game that I can tell you the difference between game 1 and game 2 already is fairly significant. If you walk into game 1 expecting more than Carcassonne with story, you're expecting the wrong thing. Divinus is a fun experience. I enjoyed my play with Divinus, but the first scenarios are very much going to be on the lighter side. I do not know how much it develops, but I can tell you that, again, even just game 1 to 2 is a big level of development. So please, whatever you do, if you do get Divinus, at least give it till game 2 to see if it's a game for you or not. So the Should You Back It in this case is not going to be covering at all whether you can get your money back for this game, because assuming you play it at all, that's just not a conversation on the table. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the differences between retail and GameFound, as well as the fact that whether it's just worth it for you or not. As far as the retail versus GameFound, the only real exclusives are going to be what shows up in the Pandora's box. If you look through the options over here, if we click through, let's say, the Godly Pledge over here, and you check through what's going on, in fact, let's go ahead and check the full pledge. So let's go ahead and click on the Chest of Plenty, looking for all the stuff that says it's, well, exclusive. So we're going to see over here, we have all the meeples upgraded. That's going to be Lucky Duck exclusive. We're going to have the new Myth scenario from the Chest of Plenty. That's exclusive. We have the Backer Vote Mini, the Pandora's Box. Those are going to be the exclusive things. Versus the base game of the Divinus Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion and the base game of Divinus, those are not Kickstarter exclusive, are GameFound exclusive, you see. As well as the Divinus Chest of Plenty, that doesn't seem to be tagged as being exclusive, although I would be surprised if that wasn't, because they're not giving the miniatures. So that Chest of Plenty itself, I'm not sure, but for sure the base game and the Shadows of Yggdrasil expansion will not be exclusive. So that means that you're looking at some of the extra content as being harder to get, to track down, because the secondhand market for this is not going to be big for exactly the reasons I just gave. The miniatures, there may be a great secondhand market for those. As someone who played through the legacy game and they're done with it, and they're, hey, who wants to buy my miniatures for $20? That I can totally see that happening. I don't know if it will or won't, but I can see it happening. Just the nature of having miniature upgrades to a legacy game that is self-contained. But for the most part, the content you have, the unlockable, expandable content, the Pandora's Box, the myth, all that stuff, that may or may not be harder to track down. So that's going to be the retail versus Kickstarter, retail versus GameFound. You see, I told you I would do this. Retail versus GameFound conversation. It comes down to the extra content, because the base game, rest assured the base game will be cheaper at retail. That should not be a surprise. That is standard for almost anything, and including Lucky Duck. If you look at their base games at retail, it will 100% be cheaper. €54. I mean, this might be more expensive than the regular games. I don't know about that, but €54 plus the fact that you're going to be paying another €14 in shipping, that is not a small amount. That's not a small amount of money to get in on this game. It will be cheaper at retail. So if you're just looking for the core content alone and you don't care about the Pandora's box and the myths and the miniatures and the meeples, whatever it is, then go ahead and just wait for retail. This will be cheaper that way. You might have to wait for the next print run, depending on how well this game does. You might be looking at a temporarily being sold out all over the place while you wait for them to reprint it. So that might be a factor. But as far as cheaper, it will be cheaper for the core content if you don't care about the extras and whatnot. That comes down to really just whether you care about getting it faster and whether you care about the myths and all the extra exclusive content. As far as past that, Divinus is a game that first of all, I'm back in this game, but it's not as clear to me whether you should, and let me explain what I mean by that. Divinus is a game that is not cheap. It's not cheap. At the end of the day, this thing is coming in at the low end, somewhere in the range of $80 to get this game once you factor in shipping, and at the high end, especially if the VAT or taxes or shipping or any of these things, at the high end, it's going to be fairly expensive to get absolutely everything for this game. And the game depth, at least based on what I've seen so far, is in the vein of My City with a degree of narrative thrown in. There is a degree of narrative overlapping that. There's more to it than My City. I'm not comparing it to My City. It's not the same game. But it does give me the same experience, but it gives me more of it. What I would say is if you have played My City, and if it wasn't for you, My City, again, is going to be a legacy light polyomino tile laying game. If you've played My City and it wasn't for you, I would caution you to wonder if Divinus is going to be adding enough story and extra things on top of that type of experience to be worth playing. And if you have played My City, if you haven't played My City, by the way, pick it up. It's a fantastic game, and it'll run you like $25 to $35. It's going to be much, much cheaper and easier to get your hands on. And if you have played My City, and you're looking for something else, Divinus is giving me enough gameplay content, enough scenarios, enough extra immersion, enough degrees of placing down my stickers and feeling the world develop underneath me that I am willing to pay for that experience. But at least in terms of the gameplay weight to gameplay price, it does seem to be a little high in terms of the weight to price ratio, which is a mythical concept that just in general I find people have a harder time paying more for lighter games. This is something we saw with Foundations of Rome as well. Foundations of Rome by Arcane Wonders, that sometimes you have lighter gameplay styles of games that are expensive, and it does have a harder time almost being justified to a certain extent. I think Divinus is a enjoyable experience, and for me, it's worth jumping in on it. For me, it's worth engaging in that legacy game. I do enjoy legacy games a lot, and Divinus is no exception. I find legacy elevates the basic core gameplay mechanics of a game by making you more immersed in the experience, in the journey, in the development. And in the case of Divinus, it's a good example. For my review, I gave it a 4 to 5, but I said it's a 3 out of 5 gameplay, but it's elevated to a 4 out of 5 in terms of the legacy. And that very much is an apt description of Divinus for me. It's a good, solid, fun game that is made more enjoyable, more immersive, and worth the price tag because I like the legacy journey. The legacy journey means that I will dive into this game. I will play the 12 scenarios. I will enjoy them. I'll jump out the prequel. I'll play those 8 scenarios, and then I'll check to see whether I will or won't play the Eternal mode. And speaking of the Eternal mode, back the game or not, but I will say do not back the game expecting to play the Eternal mode unless you are someone who has played legacy games in the past after they are done. Many legacy games offer you that promise, that idea that you can keep on playing it. And I did a video on this. I'll link down below. I did a video a few weeks ago about this, about the idea that legacy games offer replayability once they are done, once they are complete, but few actually deliver on that promise. And it's not their fault. It's the nature of what a legacy game is, that diving back into it after you're done feels counterintuitive. It feels like something that's not worth the time and energy that you need to do so. Divinus may be the exception. I certainly hope it is. I enjoyed the gameplay enough that I could see myself diving into it if I have a reason to. But I don't know if the game will give me a reason to, or whether it will say, hey, congratulations, you're done, but now you can keep playing it if you want to. That kind of reason to won't result in me jumping back into it. That's overall the should you back it for Divinus or not. A little bit different this time because there is no resale value on a legacy game. It's more a question on retail versus game found, and then secondly, whether it is worth it to you or not. This is overall an enjoyable experience, but understand you will probably be paying somewhere in the range of $100+ for in the range of 25, maybe 30 hours of gameplay, possibly even less, depending on how much you go into eternal mode, depending on the player counts. That may well be worth it. $100 for 25 hours of gameplay is $4 an hour. That's excellent in comparison to some things, but it's not as good in comparison to others, which is where that balance comes in. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.